Okay. Hi, everyone. Hey, Linguistic Society gang, everyone. So today we will be learning Tagalog, which is one of the languages we speak at home. So for those who don't know me, I'm part of the absolute best club on campus and probably in the universe known as Harvard Undergrad Linguistic Society. And I'm half Filipino. At home, we speak English, of course, but also Tagalog and a dialect known as Ilocano, which is a Filipino dialect. And I'll be trying my best to introduce Tagalog to you guys. Also know I am a heritage speaker, so this was kind of fun, like to look at my language through an academic lens. Let's start. Okay, give me a minute. So we can preface Tagalog with some history. So just for starters, Tagalog derives from a meaning from the river. So it's classified as an Austronesian language and more broadly, or more specifically, a Malayo-Polynesian language. So you'll see a lot of similarities in its structure and some words and morphemes with surrounding. So there are some words like Malaysian that I can pick out, etc. And then, interestingly, there are multiple influences that go beyond Spain and America. Just to group them all together, the first biggest one before Spain was South Asia. So Sanskrit was a huge language that influenced the Philippines. Just, I believe geographically, there was a bridge that allowed, or at least trade that allowed for a lot of people in South Asia to come into the Philippine Islands, and that formed a huge basis for the initial influence. And then, of course, we have Spain, we have colonialism, as many countries faced, and Philippines was no exception. So Spain occupied for over 3 centuries. It was colonizing the language was extremely huge, and they mandated that Spanish be used virtually everywhere that was controlled by Spain. And then lastly, we have is America, United States. So right now, I would say that no one truly speaks like full Tagalog in like mainland Manila or in the main city, the big cities, the very urban places. There's a combination of English and Tagalog known as Taglish. And as of right now, socially, to use English is to show a sign of like class and education. So in a way, it's kind of looked down upon if you do not use Taglish, which is a bit sad because I don't know. Tagalog I see is in a way dying because of that. There are many words now that I use like stress. Like when I say like the word stress, I don't really know what's the Tagalog equivalent of stress. And even a lot of my peers who are from the Philippines, they agree with that. So continuing on, so just minor nuance of Filipino history is there actually used to be a Filipino script known as Babayan. And this was pre-Hispanic, pre-Spanish colonialism, and it's actually really cool. And in recent years, there's been a resurgence of using this script. The thing about the script, though, is it does not necessarily translate well into modern Tagalog, but there are a lot of words that people have been trying to revive, bring back in order to use the script. So if you see someone's Instagram bio or something with like these weird characters, they're probably Filipino, etc. So morphology. So one cool thing about Tagalog is that there are different morphemes for indefinite and definite morphemes. So we have ang, nang, mga, isang, ilang. So some indefinite morphemes include isang, nang, ilang. So I'll show, like, as you can see, there's different combinations that result in like different meanings, I guess. So isang manzanas is an apple. And then if you use nang when it is the product, when it is the object. So gusto ko ng manzanas, because apples are the object, that's where you use it. And then if you want to make it plural and also indefinite, you add ilang. So nang ilang manzanas. And then for the definite morphemes, it's mainly just ang and mga. So ang manzanas is the apple. Gusto ko ang manzanas. If you're no matter if it's the object, if you're specifying it, use ang, and then mga is kind of like the equivalent of ilang. So let me continue on. So next is some formality and register. So in Tagalog, we have, for formality, we use po. So I guess an English equivalent would be like ma'am and sir. But a notable difference is that ma'am and sir could refer to like a noun, like it's an actual noun. But in po in Tagalog isn't necessarily the same thing. I just like to consider it as a morpheme in this case, because I don't necessarily know like how to better express it. So it can be looked at as a bound morpheme and an unbound morpheme. So with the example of it being a bound morpheme, we add po to as a suffix. So in this scenario that I came up with, like andito bang kotse ko is like, is my car here? I would reply if I were the valet worker with opo. So the way you say yes in Tagalog, like informally or just generally, is oo, but you would say opo and it's considered one word. So that's how po is being used as a bound morpheme. In the second example, when let's say your grandmother asked how was school, you would just say mabute po. You would add that po at the end, but it's its own separate morpheme. It's not attached or anything. So you always have to use po when you're talking to someone you don't necessarily know who's older, or you're trying to show a sign of respect, etc. Because if not, you will be clocked. Okay. So some cool other morphology facts. So this is, I'm going to talk about conjugation and reduplication. I'm taking a course at MIT and I've been really huge on learning about reduplication. I think it's such an amazing morphological process, etc. So some general conjugation with Tagalog is, see here, so sayaw is the root. So nag sayaw, you add nag to the root to make it past tense. So to make it present tense, you reduplicate sa, so, or whatever phoneme is there. So in this case, nag sa sayaw. So you would reduplicate sa, and then to make it past tense, you switch the nag to mag. So to make this future tense, my bad. Mag sa sayaw is future tense. You replace nag with mag. So a good chunk of Tagalog verbs follows this general conjugation, and it's unlike English. You don't have to do it based on the speaker. Like you don't have to do subject verb agreement necessarily. It's similar to Chinese, like washer. Like you don't have to do that. It's more like washer and less like English. And then in the context of reduplication, compared to English, Tagalog has way more capabilities and with reduplication, and we use it more frequently. So in English, the only thing I can really think about is like versus like. Obviously, when you reduplicate the word like in English, it has this extra connotation where it's like, oh, you're crushing hard. And Tagalog, you can do this, but to greater extents, such as you can reduplicate words to change the syntactic categories. So for example, in the first example, arao means, oh, my bad. Arao means day. And then if you reduplicate the word arao, that means every day. It becomes from a noun to an adverb. And then these are other examples. Labis means a lot. Labis means too much. Liko means turn. Liko means zigzag. Gaya means to copy. Gaya means copycat. So reduplication is is more expansive in Tagalog. And just in general, every time you want to add emphasis to like an adjective when you're speaking to someone, you just reduplicate the word. So if I think someone is cute and I'm talking to my friend, like I will say, to say like cute for a dude is like pogi. But if I want to like say, oh, he's like fine, I would say like pogi or pogi naman. So some syntax. So this is another interesting thing that it was hard to wrap my head around because I didn't recognize I was doing this. So for the most part, Tagalog is verb initial, but we have three different word orders that we do see in Tagalog. So we have verb subject object, verb object subject, and subject verb object. So the differences is that subject verb object is very literary, and SVO is what we use in English. Like I have an apple. So that's subject verb object. That's very literary, and my assumption is that it's literary because it matches Spanish and matches what was in the Bible when they had to like read it and was being converted to Catholicism, etc. These are some examples of the different orders and how they're seen in Tagalog language. So the SVO order, ang aking nanay kumakain ng mansanas, like my mother's eating an apple, it's quite literally, ang aking nanay, my mother, kumakain, the verb in the present tense, ng mansanas, the object. So this is, like, that sounds very awkward. Like, you wouldn't hear that, like, said out loud necessarily. And then we have a VSO order, kumakain, the verb, si nanay, the object, ng mansanas. Oh, the subject object got a bit messed up there, like the labeling, but yeah. This means my mother eats an apple. All of them mean the same. It's just in this case, you have the verb first. And what I recognize is that between VSO and VOS, you do hear it interchangeably. It's just there's this nuance in the meaning conveyed. So one has more, so kumakain si nanay ng mansanas. This one to me has more of an emphasis on like it's like my mother is the one eating. And then the like more general preferred way you would just say the sentence is kumakain ng mansanas si nanay, which is the verb, ng mansanas is the object, and si nanay. So with Tagalog in general, there's a lot of variation with how you can express words, and the manner in which you express a sentence like affects the meaning. So now some phonology and phonetics. So personally, phonology and phonetics isn't really like my kind of thing, but I attached the sound inventory to help. So here is the consonants. The first table has all the consonants, and then the one at the bottom has the vowels. Some things to recognize with Tagalog that's different than English is we have a lot of influences, as I mentioned previously, most importantly Spain. So one of them is like the alveolar trill when you roll your R's. That's very, very common in Tagalog. And yeah, there's a word to describe people who can't do it, but I'm completely blinking. But just know that rolling your R's is very important to Tagalog, and it's very characteristic, especially when you compare it to other Austronesian or other Asian languages. So one specific vowel in Tagalog that's distinct is the nang sound, and it's very characteristic and it's frequently used. In fact, nang is one of the morphemes or one of the indefinite morphemes that I showed earlier with morphology. So you're going to be using it a lot. So it's a very foreign sound to many people, but one way to like identify and practice it is in the English word sing, that where your tongue or like your mouth is at the end of sing, like that's very similar to how the nang sound is. So if you just do that, like sing, and just pay attention to where your tongue is placed and like the vibrations, etc., that'll start to help you more and more with understanding how to like pronounce this word. Some other sound variations that you'll recognize when listening to Tagalog is that there's very much a distinction between old Tagalog and modern Tagalog. And it's not necessarily like there's a fine line between like old and modern. It's just older generations speak it in a different manner. And this relates to so many different things. It's regional differences, as well as, English coming and becoming more and more important in the Philippines with consumerism, American imperialism, etc. So one is hindi versus hindi. Hindi and hindi, they both mean no. So like someone were to ask you something like, do you have an apple? You would just say like, and you don't. You just say hindi or hindi. With me, I recognize that there's a lot of difference with how people pronounce this. And it's not anything important. Like you'll be able to recognize it. It's just the N vowel sound. I just believe that older generations, I think, use hindi more. No, older generations, yeah, they use hindi more, and like more modern, like people my age, etc., or my mom, she uses more hindi. You see this a lot with different verbs that have this I, like ending with an I versus ending with the E. And that is speed teaching of Tagalog. Salamat. Thank you so much. If you have, I know that was like a very, very like big emphasis on speed teaching, but if you guys have any questions, I'm here to help. I can also go back for any slides too.
Yeah, so I have a question. So I'm interested about like the different like dialects of Tagalog.
Yeah.
Like how much variation is there across like the islands? I'm sure like each island has like a slightly different way of saying something. Or can you speak to that a little?
Yeah. So of course, Tagalog is like the lingua franca of the Philippines. The best way I can express it, like to preface it, is kind of like in China, Mandarin is the lingua franca, but usually at home or when you're in like cities, especially rural, they're not really speaking Mandarin. They may speak like Fujianese or Shanghainese. It's very similar to Tagalog and the dialects. So with Ilocano, of course, there are very similar words. Like in Tagalog, to say heart, you say puso. To say heart in Ilocano, you say pusok. But there are very evident differences. Like to say no in Tagalog, you say hindi or hindi. In Ilocano, you say mede or medi. So generally, I would say for the vast majority of the time, you cannot understand one another if you know Tagalog, but you don't know a certain dialect. When I went to the Philippines 2 years ago, every time we'd like travel and go to a different city and they weren't speaking Tagalog, it's very rare that my entire family wouldn't understand what was going on. So that just goes to show how different the dialects are. And there's one certain dialect that is very interesting, and I encourage people to look up. It's called Chabak. I'm pretty sure that's how you spell it. It's if anyone knows Spanish and you look this up, it sounds almost identical to Spanish. Like it's extremely weird. And if you know any friends who speak Spanish and you show it to them, they're like, "Whoa!" But this is a very like it's that just goes to show that there's a lot of differences, and it comes from geography. It comes where about what influences each region had. So in more Spanish colonized places, you hear more of that trill, like the alveolar trill in the language. You see more of the differences in words. Jacob.
Yeah, do you think you could talk a little bit about the voice system within Tagalog? Because I know at least with the other Philippine languages and Austronesian languages that there's like a special like Austronesian alignment. So I'm just wondering how that manifests itself in Tagalog.
So you're speaking like, can you
like passive voice kind of stuff, like active voice, passive. I know that like what from all I know, at least in terms of like Tagalog, is like let me see if I can pull up an example sentence real quick. Do you know what I'm talking about in terms of voice,
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, what's it called? That's weird. So I can go back to the slide, I guess. Let me share the screen. It goes to syntax, and I can connect it to. So this like in syntax, how you there's way more. I would say there's way more passive voice and active voice and variations with how you express things in Tagalog than in English. So if you want to say like kumakain si nanay ng mansanas, like that adds extra emphasis on like the mother. It is my mom who's eating instead of like, my mom's just eating an apple. And this is way more expanded. Like this is just one snippet of it. I don't know how to express it. Like you can say things in Tagalog where there's more emphasis on the actor, or there's more emphasis on the recipient. There's emphasis on like the tense. So I think that helps to explain why there's so many variations and grammatically correct variations with Tagalog word order. And that relates to like passive voice and active voice, because if you have more emphasis on the actor, it translates more to like our conception of active voice, or at least my conception of active voice. And I think that's similar to a lot of other Austronesian languages, at least the ones that I'm familiar with, and we discuss in intro linguistics.
What part of the Philippines is your family from?
My family, we're from Nueva Ecija. Specifically, we're from this, it's pretty rural. It's called Tlugtug. We have like an ancestral home there, a lot of history. There's a lot of like history there and in surrounding parts concerning Japanese imperialism and when Japan invaded the Philippines in World War II. But yeah, this is where we speak Ilocano in that part. Oh, another thing to mention is that just like in America, we can tell where someone's from based on how they speak. Like if someone speaks with a Boston accent, or if someone speaks with a Valley Girl accent, it's very similar in Philippines, but it's a notch more in depth, because we can also tell what dialect someone speaks, like based on how they're speaking the lingua franca, how they're speaking Tagalog. So like someone here, I remember she lives in Dunster, and I was in Dunster last semester. We were speaking Tagalog, and then the way she was speaking sounded like she was speaking Ilocano, like my dialect. And I asked her, like, "Are you Ilocano?" And she was like, "Yeah, I can speak Ilocano." So yeah, you can tell not only like the region someone's from, but also any dialects that they speak, if they do speak any dialects.
How big of an area would that be? Like, does that mean like she grew up like, I don't know, 5 minutes away, or does it mean she could be like 1,000? Or could she be like really far away?
Yeah, she's also a heritage speaker, but both her parents are from the Philippines and they speak Ilocano. So I can tell that like they come from an Ilocano speaking portion of the Philippines. Like sometimes I guess telling where someone is from is harder than telling whether or not they speak a certain dialect, just by hearing them speak Tagalog. But if someone's from Manila, like the main city, or any of the main cities of Manila or of the Philippines, it's very hard because in those places, I don't think they speak any other dialect really. It's and they also speak a certain way. I guess a comparable way is like in Mexico, how people speak in Mexico City is going to be very distinct than how they speak in Guadalajara or somewhere else.
I mean, like how big, like how many, like what proportion of people who speak Tagalog are ones who
Oh, Ilocano.
speak your dialect? Yeah.
I'd say it's actually
Is
very.
it like
I'd say it's pretty uncommon, especially in the United States. I would say that I don't want to give like a percentage, but I think Ilocano is the sixth or seventh most common dialect out of like 100 plus. But those other dialects, like it's very small amounts, I would say. In the okay, since I'm not sharing, I can also turn my video on since I have the bandwidth. But also in the Philippines, if you're in America and you see people who are from the Philippines, there's a high chance that they speak Cebuano, which comes from like the more northern parts, and it has to do with many factors. One is that it's like the socioeconomics of it, etc. One thing about coming to America from the Philippines is you need show money, you need connections, a lot of that. So one verb, I should have used this verb in my thing. How you say undocumented, the way you say undocumented in the Philippines, at least how I was like taught or picked up is tago ng tago. Tago comes from the root verb to hide, and use tago ng tago means like undocumented or you're hiding. It's very pejorative. Like it's very, very mean. Like you should, if you call like a Filipino that, like might as well like speak on their mom's name, etc. But yeah, most of the people who are in the United States, I find that they speak Cebuano.
Is it the case that like regions that are geographically close together have similar dialects, and as you go farther away, it becomes harder and harder to understand each other?
I would agree with that. I think like there's a very distinct difference between like rural and modern parts, and the vast majority of the Philippines, I would say, is pretty rural. And the further you go from like a urban center, you see more and more differences. Also, the amount of Taglish used varies based on location. So if you go to Manila, or you go to a very high tourist place such as like Makati, which is very it's very more like rich, you're going to hear people speaking English if in Tagalog, if not complete English. But then if you're going to rural parts, you're probably not going to hear that much, if any, English incorporated within what they're saying at all. And then with in terms of dialects, you do see some mixing. Like I do hear people mixing dialects all the time, or speaking Tagalog and Ilocano.
I know in like the south of the Philippines, there's like a larger percentage of like Muslim population. Is there like any different like language in that area? Do you know about that?
I'm not necessarily familiar with. I'm familiar that the southern part of the Philippines has a huge Muslim population. I would assume that because of that, there is like Arabic influences. But I don't think I've ever really. Yeah, I don't want to speak much on that because I don't have that much experience. I don't want to give like false info. But I wouldn't be surprised if there was differences.
I thought it was like pretty interesting to hear about like Taglish and like to see the Spanish word manzanas. And do you know like what generally ballpark, like what proportion of Tagalog words come from English and Spanish nowadays?
Yeah, I'd say now I don't want to give like a fake number. I can actually just probably do a quick Google search. From my experience, I would say about like 30%. Yeah, 20 to 33% is what they would say from Spanish origins. I would agree with that. There's a lot of words like manzanas that you would see, or a lot of like cutlery in Tagalog is the exact same. One thing that's distinct to Tagalog, at least from my understanding, is that we have two number systems. So we have the Spanish number system, like uno, dos, tres, but then we also have like I guess like Tagalog number system, isa, dalawa, tatlo, like those. And you use these different number sentences, these number systems in different contexts. So if I'm talking about time, I use like the Spanish one. But if I'm just talking about like, do I have like one, you wouldn't, if you say I have an apple, you would say you have like, you would say isang manzanas. You wouldn't say uno, if that makes sense. But I guess that's like, wow, I didn't even think about that. Like that's a unique trait of Tagalog, I would say. Other things that are interesting because of the cross-cultural interactions is that um, there are many words that were borrowed from Spain or from Spanish that have a completely different meaning. So one of which is, let's see, like in Spanish, it's siempre, which means always. But in Tagalog, you say siempre, which means like, of course. Another example of like influence from Spanish is the way we greet each other, kamusta, kamusta ka. It's a like combination, or I forgot, a creolization of como estás. So if you say como estás quickly, it sounds like kamusta. So those are some like influences that you see manifest in Tagalog.
That's really cool. Is that number system also base 10?
I think, I don't want to give a false answer. My initial answer was yes, like the Tagalog number system. But then again, I don't really use it that much. Like I think it's very rare that I'm like telling like my mom or my grandparents, like, or doing math in Tagalog, I would say.
Right.
So in math, would you be using Tagalog numbers rather than Spanish numbers?
I
Like
think
you're learning math in math class. Sorry.
I think you use Spanish numbers. Let me be sure about that. Doing math in Tagalog. Yeah, actually, I'm trying to search it up, but I don't know. I've never really seen. I think because also in the Philippines, English is very heavily emphasized in like education. So like my mom, she was born in the 70s. The vast majority, if not all of her learning was done in English, and she comes from like a more rural part as well. So I think it's very rare that people even do math in Tagalog or in like the Spanish number system, I would say. The only time I really have heard like the Spanish number system used is when referring to time. Like you would say like a las ocho, you wouldn't say it, or you wouldn't say like, you wouldn't use like the Tagalog number system. I probably should find out how to like distinguish the two in a better manner.
This is a little off topic, but how do you think like Duterte has used or affected language? I know like he speaks like Cebuano, right?
I believe so. Mm-hmm.
And like I'm wondering like how that dynamic works, or does he have like a linguistic nationalism that he prefers the Philippines to use, or?
Yeah, so Duterte, like he has a lot of policies and quite literally like every aspect of political, economic. I'd say he is doing a huge movement, or at least a noticeable movement when it comes to culture. And I believe that is a lot of that is like anti-English, anti-American. I think in fact he's even trying to change the name of the Philippines to be Maharlika, which was the original name of like at least one of the Filipino islands, if not all of them, before Spain. So he's very much trying to like he is very much playing on this idea of nationalism. Other things also include just always talking bad about America, consumerism, etc. I think like for the most part, I'm trying to think if there's anything else culture-wise, but for the most part, that's it. Oh, he's doing a huge like Catholic revival in the Philippines, I would say. Like there was an evident shift more towards secularism, or at least not caring much about Catholicism, but he's a very staunch Catholic who has been causing a lot of resurgence in Catholic and religious sentiment. So that's like anti-LGBT, anti-prostitutes, all of that.
That's interesting. I wonder how like it'll balance out between him like wanting to keep English out of it and just English influence coming from like technology and stuff and tourism.
I find it interesting because I don't know, like if you go to like the Philippines, if you speak English, like the perception of people who speak English, or if you're like a native Filipino and you speak English, like there's a very distinct difference in how people will perceive you and treat you. One funny thing is like if you're speaking English, because everyone who's going to try to speak English, they're going to say like nosebleed. I don't know why. It's just like if they can't think of a word in English, like, oh my god, nosebleed. Yeah. And if you go to like a rich part like Makati or the Mall of Asia, like any of those very urban parts, you will only hear Taglish, I would swear. News outlets, they speak like all the actors are light skinned, speaking English, etc. So my lighting is going like crazy, so I'm gonna just like turn off my camera.
Do you know if there have been any like Tagalog words in English or any influence at all? I mean, I'm sure there's something like very tiny.
I, I I don't think there's any words that necessarily I find
Maybe like food names.
Like there's like lumpia and pancit, but those are like I don't think we really use those words like in English without specifically referring to like the Tagalog word itself. But on the other hand, like there are a lot of Tagalog words for foods that I think now are being switched to English, especially to cater to like the tourists. So like there's some places I've seen like egg rolls. How they refer to like lumpia is basically like Filipino egg rolls. I've seen people say like, oh, we have Filipino egg rolls here when I visited Manila.
Yeah, I've definitely noticed like a similar thing happening in Serbia.
Mm-hmm. I would say like I don't know. It's in my opinion, it's kind of sad because there is a disconnect between older generations and younger generations. Like even when I'm speaking Tagalog with my grandparents, because I lived with my grandparents for the vast majority of my life, and they primarily speak Tagalog and Ilocano. There will be so many words that they'll say, like even how to say best friend. They'll say a word, and like my mom would laugh because she's like, "Oh my God, that's so ancient, like how you're speaking, etc." Or if I try to like learn Tagalog in an academic sense, and I for some reason found like a dictionary, and I say like the literal translation of a word, like in this case like stress, because no one really says the Tagalog word for stress anymore. Like my mom or like peers, when I use like, oh, what the hell, like what are you saying? Or they'll know, but like, oh, that's kind of weird, it's kind of awkward. It's kind of like if you're speaking in Old English, I would say, or instead of saying pants, you say trousers or something like that. Don't mean to shade the British people, but yeah.
Adam, according to the internet, don't know how accurate this is, but it says boondocks is a word of
Yes, I forgot. I know that one actually. It's named after like Bundok. It's a mountain in the Philippines. They had like a battle near there, and they were like out in the boonies or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't know that. Oh my God.
Bundok. Yeah, I remember that one. Good etymology. Yeah. Comes from mountain because like of American soldiers in the Philippines. Yeah.
Oh, another thing to mention, I don't know, a lot just comes from like America doing stuff in the Philippines, but spelling in the Philippines, there's a lot of variation. Like my grandma or my grandpa, when they text or when they like Facebook Messenger me, because they just prefer to use Facebook Messenger for some reason, how they spell things in Tagalog are very different from what I would expect or from what I know my mom, like how my mom spells. And I'm not sure if that's because words are being more and more Americanized or like the spelling of it, but it's just like that's one thing that I've noticed consistently, like how they spell things are very different. Even when there's someone in my LS1B class, she speaks some Tagalog, and I said like hello, like just kamusta, and she spelled it I think like Kumusta, and I spelled it like Kamusta. And then I searched it up, and then one was like, oh, one is an old Tagalog spelling and one is a new Tagalog spelling, etc. And there's like so many things like that that I was like, I don't even know why it's occurring in the first place. But that just shows that like the language is pretty volatile.
Oh, well.
Yeah, I checked out a book from the library a couple of weeks ago. It was like on Austronesian languages, and I only like remember one word specifically because it was funny, from Tagalog, and it was suso. And I don't know if that's like an actual word, if that's just like academic, but that was funny.
So, suso, that's like,
I mean, it's breath.
yeah, like grooves, like.
Yeah. That's why I remembered it.
I was like, okay. I was thinking you're gonna say like something like academic. I was like,
oh no, I don't know if it's like an actual word, but it was in the book, so
yeah.
It was like demonstrating like I forget what the example was, but it was like about like how like the final vowel like changes to a U sometimes, so like susuhin or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of the things that I like about Tagalog is like there's a lot of reduplication within words. Like you just repeat a like morpheme or phoneme, I guess. Like if it's la, you say la la, or if it's ma, ma ma. But then when someone's learning Tagalog, there's like a lot of weird stuff when it comes to stress, because just depending on the sentence, like the stresses of words can like vary. Another thing is like hindi versus hindi. The one time that you do say hindi for sure is that like hindi is at the end of the sentence.
Anybody else have questions? Well, awesome. Thank you so much. That was really interesting. Definitely learned a lot there.
Thank you guys. If you have any questions or just PM, etc., or want to know more about Filipino culture, Heritage Speaker Craig is always here.
And I guess you can stop the recording.